Welcome, everyone. This is the Unitarian Universalist Animal Ministry. I'm Reverend John Millspaw, Executive Director. Our guest today is acclaimed animal advocate Gail Eisnitz, author of the new memoir, Out of Sight, an undercover investigator's fight for animal rights and her own survival. This is a 2025 book that chronicles her successful fight to document and expose scandalous animal abuse in agriculture over decades in the face of a rare visual processing disorder that she has grappled with since childhood. I've read the book cover to cover. It's a powerful exploration of resilience, healing, and justice, and a call to action for everyone who dreams of a kinder world. Eisnitz's work has been featured in leading news sources like the New York Times, the Miami Herald, the Los Angeles Times, and U.S. News and World Report. Her interviews have been heard on more than 1,600 radio stations and resulted in exposés by ABC's Good Morning America and Dateline NBC. Today, I'll speak with Gail about her personal journey, what her firsthand investigations of American animal agriculture uncovered, how she has collaborated with other truth tellers to expose abuses, where society has made progress in farmed animal welfare and where much more progress is needed, the roles of federal and state laws, and what sources of wisdom, inspiration, and renewal help her persevere. Gail Eisnitz, it's my honor to welcome you to the UUAM interview.
Thank you, Reverend John. I'm so happy to be here with everybody.
You've led a most unusual life. What led you to investigate how farmed animals are treated?
Well, I started when I was working with the Humane Society of the U.S. doing other investigations into other types of animal abuse, and I received a letter from a USDA employee down in Florida at the largest slaughterhouse in the southeastern United States, and he had reached out to all of his supervisors, his congressmen, the Veterans Administration, everybody he could to tell them that animals were still fully conscious while they were having their heads skinned. And and nobody would respond to him except for to say that it's the same way everywhere else, except for it's only a little worse at this operation. So he reached out to a number of animal groups, and I was the only response he got. So I went down to Florida and corroborated his claims with other USDA employees and other workers, and he was subsequently fired for being a whistleblower, which is against the law. So we won him his job back eventually, and the plant mysteriously, even though it had plans to expand, shut down and went out of business. So that got
Quite,
me into the field because that was my first look into slaughterhouses. And then from there on, I looked at slaughterhouses and factory farms across the United States.
what a beginning. What made your personal journey so unique?
Well, like you said, I have this rare visual processing disorder, and my vision is pixelated, and that means everything is made up of dots. Um, and at times I kind of felt like I had dyslexia of the world, like things just didn't make sense, like looking into a funhouse mirror or something like that. So my efforts to expose and document, investigate, and expose animal cruelty um, take place against this, my efforts to find a diagnosis to this rare disorder because I couldn't find a diagnosis and I didn't know what was wrong with me for the first 60 plus years of my life. So I wrote this book not as a litany of horrors, but as a story of my challenge doing the investigations while I was struggling with this disorder. And so it makes for an interesting read. And it's a rare disorder that wasn't identified in the scientific literature until 10 years ago. That's why all the doctors I saw kept saying, there's nothing wrong with you, go away. Um, And I was diagnosed about 3 years ago, and that diagnosis is explored at the book's climax. So the book is kind of like a detective story. It's kind of like a mystery, and Amazon Amazon reader reviews say that a lot. They say that they can't put it down, which is great because I want to get the information about the animal abuse out to the public, but I wanted to do it in a way that would keep people reading. So they call it a page turner. And it also talks about my experience with the network TV stations and attorneys general, and even a boss when I worked at Humane Society of the U.S. who refused to let me pursue my slaughterhouse um, findings. And he is now, I'll just give one tidbit of the story away. He is now serving life in prison. So that's kind of why my journey is a little bit unique.
That was an astonishing part of the book. And it's not the first page turner that you've written. I read the first that I know of back in the late 90s. That was Slaughterhouse. And it was an amazing, challenging read. And it really opened my eyes to conditions in slaughterhouses in particular. I'd like to think that conditions for animals have improved since then. How has the meatpacking industry, the slaughtering industry, changed in recent years?
Well, it's changed by virtue of the fact that thousands of small to mid-sized slaughterhouses have been forced out of business by these giant mega slaughterhouses. And the result is you have fewer slaughterhouses killing an ever-growing number of animals. And the result of that is slaughterhouse production line speeds have increased. And it used to be where you could kill 1,106 hogs per line per hour in a slaughterhouse. That's one hog every 3 seconds. But the last two administrations have seen to it that that cap is being lifted now. So you can kill animal hogs as fast as you want. There's no cap. There's not going to be any cap any longer. And likewise for broilers, poultry, chickens that we eat, not laying hens, but broilers, the evisceration rate is was 140 birds per minute, and now it's going to be 175 birds per minute. That's 3 birds per second. So you have these incredible line speeds, and a minute of downtime when you have such fast line speeds spells a loss of hundreds or thousands of dollars. So the line doesn't stop for contaminated meat, it doesn't stop for injured workers, and it certainly doesn't stop for slow or uncooperative animals. So,
I, I imagine that that increased line speed has pretty profound implications for animal welfare.
well, I haven't been looking at slaughterhouses for quite a while. I've been focusing on factory farms, but I do know a few things. I interviewed people who spent a combined total of 3 million hours on the kill floor, and they said, without exception, they engaged in or observed live animals being strangled, beaten, boiled, skinned, or dismembered. And so that was a while ago. And since my findings were exposed on the front page of the Washington Post, and Congress decided to fund the Humane Methods of Slaughter Act, which had been zero budgeted, since that time, their supposed enforcement of the Humane Slaughter Act. The thing is, they do what they call verification procedures, what I call spot checks, where meat inspectors who are required to enforce the law just make spot checks to the areas where the animals are being killed. And I don't think that's so effective because the workers know when they're coming into the area and they change things. Like they have code words and whistles and handheld radios to say inspectors coming into the area, slow the lines down or something like that. But the bottom line is less than 3% of the entire federal meat inspection budget goes toward enforcement of the Humane Methods of Slaughter Act. So that's really sad.
Can you tell us more about what the Humane Methods of Slaughter Act is supposed to do and who is enforcing it?
Sure.
It-
It was passed 67 years ago, and it requires that all animals except poultry and rabbits be humanely handled and rendered unconscious before they're bled and butchered. And it requires meat inspectors, the people who are in the plants inspecting our meat. It requires that they stop the line when they observe violations. And plants can lose a lot of money when the line is stopped, and they can have their establishment suspended for violations. But that doesn't happen too terribly often.
Well, one thing I learned by reading your book is that a lot of the inspectors are not even stationed in a place where they're able to see violations of the act.
Right, right. That's why they have these roaming inspectors that do these spot checks, but I don't have a lot of confidence in the spot checks.
Mm. You said you did have some success exposing slaughterhouse violations in the Washington Post.
Yeah, I badgered a Pulitzer Prize winning reporter who had won the Pulitzer Prize for a series that he had done on hog production in North Carolina when he had worked for the Raleigh Observer, I think it is. And I badgered him to please expose my findings and whatever findings he wants to get on this issue. And it was incredibly successful because he didn't want to do it, but I had somebody else talk to him who he knew, who was a man. I don't know why I think that made a difference, but it seemed to have. And he did the story, and Congress, it was on the front page, and Congress was outraged. I mean, they stood in the Senate and gave speeches about how outrageous it was that animals were being skinned alive and boiled alive, and that this was barbaric and that it shouldn't be happening in this day and age. And then it was Senator Robert Byrd from West Virginia at the time. He was the second in line to the presidency, Senate pro tem, and he was also on the Appropriations Committee, and he provided the first funding to enforce the Humane Methods of Slaughter Act, because for 43 years it was a nice law, but it was zero budgeted, so it had no way to enforce it.
That's incredible. So, were you about to say something else?
No.
Oh, okay. So you mentioned that in recent years, your focus has shifted from slaughterhouses to factory farms. As opposed to slaughterhouses, can you tell us about the federal animal welfare laws that apply on the farms themselves, including but not limited to factory farms?
Yeah. In 3 words, there aren't any. There are no federal laws regulating animals inside factory or other farms. The only laws that apply are state laws, and nobody's inside the farms to enforce them. So it's a free-for-all inside factory farms. It's really it's really bad.
Yeah, simple answer to, but a very disturbing answer. Is there anything more you'd like to say about the state laws?
Some of the state laws are good if they could be enforced. You know, they they're strong. Some of them are strong laws, but unfortunately, there's nobody there to enforce them.
Mhm.
And when you try to get them enforced, which is what I've done, talking to attorneys general in like 6 different states, trying to get state laws enforced inside factory farms, the attorneys general invariably take the side of the meat industry and don't want to touch it, don't want to go near it with a 10-foot pole. They're just like so intent on protecting agribusiness. pathetic. I mean, we've gone to attorneys general with video, still photos, testimony. In one case, we had 800 pages of worker testimony, and then they still wouldn't do anything about it.
That's incredible.
So, yeah, it's very
Um,
discouraging.
it is. Hey, I'm looking forward to asking you about how you have persevered and maintained your inspiration through all of this. But before we get there, I think a lot of the imagery that people have come to mind when they picture an animal farm is akin to the old MacDonald had a farm sort of image. The bucolic imagery is still in our grocery stores on labels of packages. But for more than 99% of farmed animals, that's not reality. What can you tell us about some of the actual routine practices that farms use for, say, chickens or pigs?
Sure. Chickens raised for meat are in extremely crowded poultry houses. Like maybe they have 50 or so thousand birds per house. And they're genetically bred for massive appetites and large breasts. And it's pathetic. I mean, I believe this is correct. A 6.5 pound broiler at 7 weeks, because they're slaughtered when they're only 7 weeks old, is equivalent to a human baby gaining 600 pounds in 2 months. They're so out of proportion that their legs are splayed out underneath them and they literally can't stand and they fall over. They can't get to their food and water. They die of starvation. A lot of them have heart attacks because their breasts are so big. They can't support themselves. They're generally in chronic pain for the last 20% of their short lives. They get ammonia burns on their breasts from contact with the poultry litter that's on the floor of the poultry barns, which is basically excrement and straw and feathers. And ammonia causes eye problems and blindness in some of the birds. It's just awful to go in a poultry barn. But as far as pigs go, oh, I could talk forever about pigs. One routine practice that probably everybody knows about is called thumping, or it's also called packing, which is the acronym for pound against concrete. It's American Veterinary Medical Association approved because the American Veterinary Medical Association is in bed with the meat industry. And thumping is where you take the piglets, the young piglets by their hind legs and the worker whirls them over their shoulder and smashes them head first to the concrete floor. That's their way of of killing them, and that's considered a standard agricultural practice, which is unfortunately often exempted from state laws. Some of the other things we've seen are uh, piglets piglets getting their feet stuck in spaces between floor slats and they can't get out because their feet are so small they can't negotiate these concrete floor slats and they starve to death. Another thing is piglets getting stuck under heat lamps and baking to death. But that's because they have, in some of these operations that we've investigated, they have fewer than one employee for every 2,000 animals.
Mm,
So the um, the the grower pigs, when they get sick, they're what we documented, and we have a lot of a lot of affidavits and video and all sorts of documentation. They're beaten to death with hammers and wrenches and gate rods, and they have their throats. Somebody would stand on their throats to kill them. Another worker told us that he put a water hose down a pig's mouth until its butt blew out. So they do all sorts of sickening things. Cannibalism is a really big problem in factory farms where they're so deprived of everything, of stimulation and everything that they eat other pigs' ears and tails and hind ends, and we have video of their faces literally eaten off. They
Mm.
actually cannibalize uh, each other down to just hide and bones. And workers actually had a nickname for that. They called the remains, the remnants of the pigs, rugs.
Mm.
So, yeah, I mean, I can go on and on about that, but I don't want to distress anybody too much. I mean, piglets swimming in the frigid waste pits, you know, that's not uncommon. And every farm you go in, there are pails and pails filled with dead piglets that have been thumped. So,
That, you know, that there was so much in what you said. I want to ask three follow-up questions. The first is, um, wouldn't it be in farmers' interest to not have these horrible welfare conditions? Don't the animals need to be thriving in order for the farmer to make the greatest profit? Why would this be allowed to continue?
they're just able to factor these losses in as a cost of doing business. I mean, there was one Oklahoma operation, for example, where they had the number of pigs that died on farm or killed on farm, not in slaughterhouses. This company, they had to give up the number because they had their dead boxes overflowing, and the State Department of Environmental Protection said they were contaminating the groundwater with overflowing dead boxes. So they had to release the number of, in the litigation, they had to release the number of dead pigs that they were losing per year. And this one corporation in Oklahoma had 420,000 dead pigs in 1 year. Those are pigs that died on farm, not even in a slaughterhouse.
Mm,
So they're just factored in as cost of doing business.
I see. So it's more efficient to produce the pigs this way. You make more profit even if you lose a certain amount of your inventory, is the thought.
Right.
Um, and you also mentioned standard agricultural practices being exempt. My understanding is that a lot of the state laws are written to say that certain animal welfare measures must be met. However, if there's a practice that's a standard agricultural practice, meaning it's commonly done on various farms, then that practice will be exempt from the cruelty statute. Is that correct?
Yes, exactly. And some states just exempt farm animals altogether.
Hmm.
But most states exempt standard agricultural practices. Yeah.
And one of those standard agricultural practices that I've seen in person and that I found very disturbing, but you haven't mentioned when you were talking about pigs, was what happens to mother pigs in particular.
Yeah, I mean,
Could you tell
that's
us about that?
sure. That's, as far as I'm concerned, that's pretty much the worst. They're confined in cages that are they weigh like 400 to 600 pounds, and they're confined in cages that are 2 feet wide by 7 feet long. In one operation we went in, the cages were only 19 inches wide. And as a result of being confined for their entire lives in these tiny cages, they get sores on their heads and their shoulders and their backs and their legs and their hindquarters. They engage in stereotypies, which means psychiatric disorders, basically head bobbing, air chewing, bar biting. They they're of course right over the waste pit, and they have real sensitive noses, but that aside, they suffer terribly from respiratory problems, foot problems, arthritis. They It's very common that they collapse in their crates. In some of the operations we investigated, they starved to death because they collapsed in the crates and they couldn't, well, they died of dehydration. They couldn't reach the water nozzle. Um, or they might be dragged alive to the dead pile where they die of starvation or dehydration. And like I said, the dead boxes are just filled with dead animals, and the dead truck comes every day to pick up the dead animals and take them to rendering. But it's just a nightmare for those poor sows. I mean, I don't like to sound hyperbolic, if that's a word. Hyperbolic, that's the word. Um, but it is a nightmare.
I think that's a fair descriptor. You've had a lot of success exposing these kinds of violations. Can you tell us about your work with HBO?
Oh yeah, that was a great one. Well, it was awful what we exposed, but they're the sows that could no longer be productive or were infirmed in some way, couldn't walk. They were kicked and hot shot prodded out of the barn, dropped off a 4-foot ledge in the freezing cold onto the freezing cold ground outside onto piles of other dead and dying pigs or infirmed pigs, not dying, infirmed pigs. And then they had a chain placed around their necks, and the chain was attached to the tines of a front end loader, and the tines were lifted, and the sows, after having spent their lives in gestation crates and producing litter after litter of pigs, was then um, strangled, suffocated under their own body's weight. It took 5 minutes for them to die. So we got that on videotape because this producer had been doing it. And HBO, in one of the few instances where television was willing to expose these types of violations, did a wonderful documentary that aired like 19 times in 1 month, and then it aired repeatedly over the next few years. It was called Death on a Factory Farm. So it was just horrendous what was going on.
But I'm so glad you were able to bring all the attention to it that you did.
Yeah, and
Um,
we had a prosecutor agree to prosecute that case, but the judge was a farmer, so it didn't go as well as we had hoped.
mm. Well, I know this is all difficult for people to hear, even if they're already aware of these facts. But I have to, before we get to some questions that are not about the conditions, I have to ask you, because all the animals that you've talked about so far are animals who are killed for meat. And having seen what you've seen, I understand why your conscience doesn't allow you to eat meat. But you are not only vegetarian, you follow a fully plant-based vegan diet. Why vegan? For example, what's wrong with eggs?
Well, people probably know, so I'm just probably giving information that they're already aware of, but that 300 million male chicks that are useless for egg production are ground up or smothered annually in the United States. So that's reason number one. That's a good reason. Reason number two is that still the vast majority of hens are crammed into cages, 6 to 8 hens crammed into a cage the size of a large microwave. Um, they peck each other in frustration, so they're debeaked with a hot blade before they're put in the cage. As chicks, they're debeaked with a hot blade. Um, they get osteoporosis and from calcium depletion from so laying so many eggs. And one that really bothers me is that the escapees, when they fall into the waste pits, somehow they escape their cages and fall into the waste pits. They just, it's hard to even put into words. They just get sucked into the mire of waste and suffocate there. I've seen video, I haven't taken the video, but I've seen video of hens in the waste pit with their heads just sticking out from the waste
Mm,
pit. And it's bad.
yeah.
And dairy, did you want to know about dairy?
Sure. I've unfortunately seen some supposedly high welfare dairies up close and personal, but yeah, can you tell us about dairy?
Sure. Dairy cows normally produce naturally under normal circumstances less than 2 gallons of milk a day to feed their calves. But today on these high production facilities, they're generating 6 to 7 gallons a day, and at peak times, twice that amount. So they're stressed out so metabolically that they're slaughtered at 3 to 5 years versus their 15 to 20 year lifespan. They get mastitis really bad. That's an inflammation of the udder. They get lameness from walking on urine and manure-soaked concrete floors. They, now one place they actually used a razor-like device to remove a portion of the nipples that were infected, which is excruciatingly unbelievable with no type of anesthetic or anything. The males that can't produce milk, the male calves, they're auctioned for bob veal, which is slaughtered within 1 to 30 days for lunch meat and hot dogs and things like that, or milk-fed veal, which everybody knows are housed in crates and can't turn around for 4 to 5 months. Or they're shipped long distances to be raised for cheap hamburger, or they're sold for rendering to be turned into tallow or grease or animal feed. Or the last thing that we documented was that they're just all these male calves, they're unwanted. So they're just abandoned on the farm to starve to death or die of dehydration, be shot. At this farm, they shot some of them. They did what they called head bashing, which meant they were beaten to death or they were buried alive. So that's a consequence of high yield, high scale, fast production in these giant mega dairies.
Mhm. Yes, and I'm tempted to go into my own stories of investigating on the ground a high welfare, regenerative, organic dairy that was in fact abusing its cows in various horrific ways for many years before another organization that I work with exposed them. And even after we exposed them, they continued to boast about how great they were for the cows, and they wouldn't admit to anything until the USDA basically forced them to, in a rare moment of the USDA doing some animal welfare enforcement when we complained to the USDA. But it was extraordinary how much they could get away with in terms of referring to themselves as high welfare because they're sort of similar to what you're describing in slaughterhouses. There were no inspectors who were routinely there. They might come on an announced visit once a year or so, and the rest of the time, the farm could do what it wanted.
Right. I think I
Um,
know the firm you're talking about.
yeah, the when you talked about the calves, can you tell us about the national veal boycott and where veal consumption stands today compared to pre-boycott? Because veal comes from the generally the males born to female dairy cows, correct?
Right, right. Well, I work for Humane Farming Association now, and I've worked with them for decades. They're a great organization. And they've had the national veal boycott, which we've been monitoring veal production, milk-fed veal production over the last many years. And since the boycott started, it's extremely successful. We've seen an 89% drop in veal production. So that's like really great.
That's incredible progress. What period of time approximately is that
Oh, it's
over?
been many years. We've been doing it for decades.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, I mean,
It's great. Sorry, go ahead.
the Humane Farming Association ran. It's great. It runs ads all over the country in major newspapers and magazines. And I think that was its first real big campaign, and it was really successful. I mean, they ran pictures of veal calves in crates in, the New York Times and Time and Newsweek and everything. And it was the first real look into what goes on inside farms.
Hmm.
So it was very successful.
The Humane Farming Association has done some incredible work, but they may not be a household name for everyone. Can you tell us a little bit more about them?
Yeah, sure. Um, HFA has 300,000 members. We do anti-cruelty investigations. We do, like I said, national media campaigns like the National Veal Boycott. We do legislation. We got the first congressional and state hearings on animal legislation because we've been around longer than anybody else has. And we do a lot of litigation, as I was mentioning before, to you in private. We just are trying to get charges filed against pure prairie poultry in Wisconsin and Minnesota and Iowa, I think it is, because they decided to go out of business and they left 1.6 million broiler chickens in sheds with contract growers with no feed. So they just left 1.6 million chickens to starve to death. And the contract growers couldn't afford to buy feed for them because the company's supposed to provide it. So we're trying to get charges brought against them. So we do a lot of litigation. So we also operate Suwana Ranch, which is a 7,000-acre animal refuge. It's the largest farm animal sanctuary in the country, and
Hmm.
it's so beautiful. It's in Northern California, and it's like a paradise for animals that were neglected or abused and were seized because of cruelty cases.
Wow. That sounds like it could be a healing place not only for animals, but for humans who do work like you do to go just be with animals in a setting that's about taking care of them and giving them a life where they can thrive.
Yeah.
Um, Thinking about that sort of restoration, it, well, the work that you do is so harrowing. I think about the personal toll it must take on you, and there's a passage in Out of Sight that describes a little bit of what it's been like for you. You say, when working on undercover, I'd witnessed heartbreaking cruelty, all the while befriending the abusers with the requisite smile on my face. I was crazy about animals, and yet I was emotionally numb when getting spattered with brains while observing cow stunning, or when photographing horses being shackled, hoisted, and bled. Not surprisingly, I had erected an impenetrable fortress around my heart. It makes all the sense in the world to me that you would erect an impenetrable fortress around your heart. Um, but what sustains you in doing this work? Are there sources of wisdom or inspiration or renewal that help you persevere?
Yeah, there are. I mean, I was pretty closed down my entire life, but that helped me do the work. But I have spiritual beliefs and they help me. Um my I'm Jewish by religion, which is my religion is Jewish, and I also am in a 12-step group. I'm not an alcoholic, I'll just say that, but I'm in a 12-step group, and that's a very spiritual program too. So it taught me that I don't control the world. I don't control everything. I'm not God. So that was a very important realization for me.
Hmm.
And I have a lot of friends too that are in that program with me, and we
Hmm.
all support each other. So it's very helpful, very helpful.
I'm so glad you have all of that. Um, so for those of us who have been made familiar through the work of advocates like yourself, with conditions in slaughterhouses and on factory farms, there are still new developments that we may be less aware of. One that I think of is one that has arisen more with climate change and bird flu, especially in the last couple of years with bird flu. we've been hearing more about the depopulation of farmed animals. Can you tell us about what depopulation is and how it's accomplished?
Sure. Depopulation is the term that animal agriculture uses for the large scale on farm mass killing of animals who, due to disease or other unforeseen circumstances, like natural or man-made disasters, can't be shipped to slaughter. In short, that means that they can't be shipped to slaughter, so they're going to grow too big. So let's kill them. The American Veterinary Medical Association, who I already mentioned is in bed with the meat industry, describes it as the rapid destruction of a population of animals in response to urgent circumstances, with as much consideration given to the welfare of animals as practicable. That's the biggest loophole you could drive a truck through, as practicable. So depopulation is usually done, one of the most common methods of depopulation is called ventilation shutdown plus, and people may have heard of that. It's exactly what it sounds like. The producers seal up barn inlets, shut off ventilation system fans, heat the barn to triple digits, and maybe pump in added steam. So the animals literally bake to death. That's the way the majority of the 185 million poultry killed to stop the spread of bird flu have been killed. And also, ventilation shutdown plus was used to kill 1 million pigs during the COVID pandemic because the slaughterhouses were temporarily shuttered because the workers were sick and the pigs were going to grow too big, so they just baked them to death. There's another form of depopulation, which is called water-based foam, which is firefighting foam, which they spray in and over the birds or the pigs, and the birds or the pigs drown or suffocate to death. And these are all standard agricultural practices. It's just unbelievable. This is how we kill millions, 185 million poultry.
Yes, and depopulation in many cases has come to be associated with something called indemnities. Can you tell us about indemnities?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Um, I I haven't been looking at depopulation in terms of indemnities, but I know that that's true that producers are indemnified for the birds and the pigs that they lose. But one night when I was watching the evening news, I saw that 40,000 dairy cows and calves had suffocated in the snow in a storm in New Mexico and West Texas. And I wondered how the farmers could sustain such huge losses. And it turns out that when I looked into it, there's something called the Livestock Indemnity Program, which pays the farmers for their death losses, 75% of market value per animal. And even for fetuses that aren't born yet, 75% for them. Um, Reimburses them for animals who die in harsh weather, even though the producers didn't protect them from the elements. And it's not only a disincentive to provide appropriate care for the animals, but it's a huge waste of taxpayer dollars. I mean, since 2008, USDA has paid out $500 million for hundreds of thousands of dead livestock and poultry. So it's a really bad program that we're paying for. And the Humane Farming Association succeeded in getting legislation introduced in Congress last session that would have done something extremely reasonable, not a big deal, just required producers to develop and implement disaster preparedness plans before they're given any money, any compensation. So we're trying to get that reintroduced in Congress this session and working on that right now.
That's great that we're working that you're working on legislation around that. I know with bird flu, it's amazing to me that there are actually vaccines that are used in poultry in other countries to great success mitigating bird flu, but we won't use those here. Instead, when any bird in a flock, and a flock can be tens of thousands of birds, but when any one bird is identified as having bird flu, the entire flock is depopulated, and then the farmer is paid an indemnity to cover the losses, and then they can do that repeatedly. So they can take no biosecurity measures. They can do nothing to decrease the chances that they're going to contract bird flu again, and yet they get reimbursed just as much the second and third time as they were the first. What
Right.
else? Was there more you wanted to say about that?
No, I was just agreeing with you.
Okay,
We don't use the vaccine because we're afraid it's going to affect trade. It's
right,
ridiculous.
right. What else about USDA's role in all of this would surprise people? And why is USDA so often siding with industry over environment and animal welfare and public health?
Well, it's pretty simple. It's because USDA has two conflicting missions. One of them is to promote the sale of agricultural products, and the other mission is to regulate agricultural products. So, of course, they want to promote the sale of agricultural products for their cronies in the meat industry, especially because a lot of people who run USDA come from the meat industry, are meat industry executives, things like that. So, yeah, that's where USDA is. It's got a conflicting mandate.
Makes sense. And it doesn't make sense. Um, you've given us a few of your success stories working with the media to expose your findings. Did you also have problems with the media exposing your findings?
Yeah, I had big problems with the media. I spent many, many months working with 60 Minutes, 2020, Primetime Live, Dateline NBC, and 60 Minutes and Dateline came out in the field, and Dateline even interviewed 12 workers that were skinning cows alive and went on screen full face to say they were sick of skinning cows alive. And so they, we had our whistleblower attorney there to protect them, and they did an on camera interview, and everything was all set. And then, as with every network, they ended up killing the story, saying it was too disturbing. Viewers might change the channel. So it's been very discouraging, but we've had some successes with print media, so that's good. And as we said, HBO was fantastic.
I would say you've had incredible success with print media, although yeah, the problems you're naming are very real as well. What about working with law enforcement? What problems did you have working with law enforcement to who sometimes would protect abusers?
Yeah, a lot. As I mentioned before, my first whistleblower exposed the problems at that Florida slaughterhouse where they were skinning the cows' heads alive. And part of the litigation that we engaged in to get him his job back, the USDA was required to conduct its own investigation into the plant. So it conducted an investigation, and as I said, the plant mysteriously went out of business. And then the Secretary of Agriculture, the actual US Secretary of Agriculture, signed off on the results of their investigation, which said that the plant was the perfect plant, gave it a glowing recommendation, said it was fantastic, and then the plant mysteriously went out of business. So that's not law enforcement, but that's regulatory enforcement. Governor of Washington impaneled a task force to investigate the skinning of live cows, the biggest slaughterhouse in Washington state. And the task force engaged in this huge cover up and said that we had orchestrated, that we had manufactured the evidence and orchestrated the whole thing for fundraising purposes. It was crazy. It was so disturbing. But we also fought with attorneys general over factory farms in Nebraska, South Dakota, Oregon, and Ohio. And they all engaged in unbelievable cover-ups or failure to prosecute when they had a ton of evidence. So that's, I don't want to make it sound like it's all discouraging because we have had some pretty big successes. We shut down what was going to be the third largest factory farm in the world. It was a hog farm on the Rosebud Sioux tribal lands, and that was going to be producing 1 million hogs a year. So we shut that down. That was successful. We've basically stopped all the egregious crimes we've documented, and we shut down a number of the operations that we've investigated. So it's not all doom and gloom.
Not in the slightest. Um, I realize we started this conversation talking about the mysterious affliction that you've had since childhood that causes you to see the world as pixelated. And we haven't talked much more about that. That factors in a really large way into Out of Sight. Why did you choose to write a mystery style memoir about these problems instead of a simple nonfiction expose?
Well, my first book was a simple nonfiction expose, and it did really well in the animal community. So that was great. It did really well. But I wanted to reach mainstream America to let people know what's going on behind the closed doors of slaughterhouses and factory farms. So I wrote my story, which is apparently pretty compelling because reader reviews on Amazon are really stellar. They're just amazing. And it reads like a detective story, as I said. It's like a mystery. And I think I have just a little uh, piece of a reader review. I mean, I got professional blurbs from fantastic people like the late Jane Goodall and Peter Singer, Animal Liberation's Peter Singer, and Matthew Scully, who wrote Dominion, and Ingrid Newkirk from PETA. But the reader reviews on Amazon are really interesting. They're all saying it's something they can't put down. One of them said, "Find this book. This book reads mostly as a thriller, a suspenseful medical mystery woven into the heroic tale of Gail Eisnitz." And then she goes on, and then she says, "Warning, you will not be able to set her life story down." The reason I'm saying that, and I'm probably blushing while I am saying it, is because I want it to be clear that it's not a litany of horrors. It's a story of a life, and it's apparently, according to those reader reviews, it's very readable. I got a text last night from somebody who said that they read it in one night. They couldn't put it down. So that's really exciting to me.
Sounds like you hit it out of the park, and I certainly appreciated the read, and it was unlike any other book about animals or investigations that I've ever read before. Okay, well, please join me in thanking Gail for not only her incredible interview today, but also for her lifetime of animal advocacy. I know, Gail, that you have been an inspiration to me since the late 90s, since I first became aware of your work. And I I am just so glad for all that you've done directly for animals and all that you've done to inspire other other animal advocates. And thank you so much for joining us here today. Thank
Right.
you so much for getting the word out as you have.
Thank you so much, Reverend John, for having me.
Okay, well, thanks everyone for attending, and we'll look forward to seeing you at the next UUAM event. Take care and peace.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
I think it was great. Thank you.